Andre Silva woke up early that morning, as always. The soft morning light came in through the window, illuminating the small, simple room he lived in. It was a hot summer day, but with a cool breeze. He lay down on the bed and, before going out, looked at himself in the mirror on the wall. Seeing himself, young and black, seemed like another reminder of the daily struggle he faced, but he was not intimidated. The clock struck 7:30 a.m. when he got up and got ready for the day. A quick breakfast, strong coffee, and the smell of books and papers filled the room. An important moment was approaching, the meeting with the lawyer who could open the door to a crucial internship at a law firm. He knew this was his opportunity to take an important step toward his dream of becoming a lawyer and helping the community. But there was something that Andre couldn't avoid. With every step he took, a feeling of tension grew. He knew that the color of his skin would always be an obstacle to be faced, something he couldn't control, but that the world constantly tried to use against him. In every corner of the city, he saw discreet and at times aggressive looks. The fight against racism seemed to be everywhere, even where he most expected safety. The drive to the city center was smooth, but the anxiety was growing. I knew how much this internship meant. Andre's mind was focused on the meeting, on the possible questions and answers, but his heart was burdened with the usual worries. The life of a young black man is not easy, and the obstacles were beyond what he could have imagined. The sun was already higher, which made the traffic on the streets more chaotic. Andre followed carefully, his car moving slowly between the other vehicles. The city never seemed to completely rest, and he was absorbed in his own thoughts, anticipating what might happen at the meeting. But his concentration was broken when he noticed the blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror. He took a deep breath and slowed down, pulling the car to a stop at the curb. The sound of the siren cut through the air, and I knew what was coming next. It was a situation he was familiar with. Being a young black man in a suburban neighborhood always attracted the attention of the authorities. As the officer approached, Andre tried to remain calm, pressing his hands on the steering wheel to keep from making any sudden movements. The approaching police officer had an impeccably tailored uniform, but the expression on his face was cold and impersonal. The name on his badge read Carlos Lopez, a police officer Andre had never seen before, but who would quickly reveal himself to be one of the men who perpetuate the abuse of power. Lopez knocked loudly on the window, and Andre, with a gesture of someone who already knew what was coming, rolled down the window. "Can you get out of the car, please?" the police officer ordered without explanation. "What's wrong, officer?" Andre asked in a firm voice, trying to hide his nervousness. Lopes didn't answer right away. He just took a quick look around, as if he was looking for something. Then, with a wry smile, he said, "I suspect you're in the wrong place, friend. A place like this isn't for people like you." The sentence was said with disdain, and Andre felt a growing weight in the words. Without further explanation, Lopez took Andre out of the car and began to search him, using quick and aggressive gestures. He spoke little, but his eyes said everything. Andre tried to explain himself, but the police officer was determined to prove something he had not done. Something much worse. Andre's heart raced as Lopes began searching for him even more aggressively. He tried to remain calm, but the officer's gesture seemed more like a threat than a simple search. Lopez didn't say much, but the fixed gaze and severity with which he searched Andre's pockets said it all. Suddenly, the officer took a small amount of white powder from under Andre's car seat and showed it as evidence. "Look what we found here," said Lopez, with a victorious smile on his face. "Drug trafficking, that's what you do here, right?" "That's not mine, I swear," Andre protested, his voice now trembling. He had never seen that substance before, but the police officer was determined to incriminate him. His eyes were full of contempt, and he seemed to revel in the humiliation he was inflicting. Lopes, without hesitation, ordered that Andre be handcuffed and taken to the police car. Although he knew he had done nothing wrong, the young man was forced to get into the police car, his body tense and a feeling of helplessness invading his being. With every movement, Andrei felt the weight of the injustice that had been imposed on him, and his mind desperately tried to find an explanation, a way out, but found nothing. When they arrived at the police station, the atmosphere was cold and impersonal. Andrei was locked in a narrow cell, without any formal explanation, without the right to contact a lawyer. It was as if he were just another number, a statistic. During the night, he could not sleep. The sound of other voices echoed off the prison walls, some crying, others screaming. But for Andrei, the loneliness and humiliation were unbearable. Deep down, I knew, being black in a country like this would always have a price. But what he didn't know was where it would lead him. The sun had barely set when Andrei was finally released. The police station, cold and impersonal, seemed to leave an indelible mark on his soul. The feeling of having been treated like a criminal, despite being innocent, was still fresh in his mind, and the emptiness he felt grew with every step he took towards the street. The drive home was silent, with Andrei staring out the window of the police car at the streets and buildings passing by. The city looked the same, but he no longer saw it the same way. The humiliation he had suffered had cut into his soul, and the weight of institutional racism was now more evident than ever. When he got home, the door slowly opened. His mother was sitting in the living room watching TV, but as soon as she saw him, her face contorted with concern. I knew something was wrong, and Andrei's expression said it all. He couldn't look her in the eyes, couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. "What happened, son?" asked the mother with a trembling voice. Andrei sat on the couch trying to gather the strength to speak, but nothing seemed to come out. How could I explain the impossible? How could I talk to him about the humiliation of being treated as a criminal just because of the color of his skin? The weight of Lope's words, the false accusation of drug trafficking, the look of contempt. Everything was still so fresh. He took a deep breath and in a broken voice finally said, "They arrested me, Mom. They accused me of something I didn't do. They humiliated me, and now my life is ruined." The pain was evident, but there was something in his eyes that was undefeated. Deep down, he knew this was not the last battle. Something inside him was growing, a silent, steady strength. He didn't know how, but he was determined to fight. The pain of being wrongly accused did not dissipate, but became a silent force that forced Andrei to do something. I couldn't just let this happen. He couldn't allow his name to be tarnished by such a blatant lie. The idea that he was being targeted by a corrupt system that used his body and his color as an excuse for abuse made him want to fight with all his might. That's when he thought of Patricia, an investigative journalist who had covered police abuses in the suburbs on several occasions. She had been at the center of multiple allegations of police corruption, fighting to expose truths that many preferred to ignore. If there was one person who could help him, it was Patricia. Andrei called her and briefly explained what had happened. She listened to him attentively, but she already knew that stories like his were more common than one might think. However, the determination in Andrei's voice convinced her to help. Together, they began to gather evidence against Officer Lopez and other members of the force. Patricia, with her experience, knew how to approach sources who could provide crucial information. She was able to locate old records of abuse of power committed by Lopez, as well as reports of witnesses who were intimidated and even assaulted by him. But the biggest discovery was a former colleague of Lope's, Carlos, who had been dismissed from the police force after reporting irregularities within the force. Carlos, despite being fired, still had valuable information about Lopez's corruption and his connections with other members of a criminal network within the police force itself. Carlos was cautious at first, but after talking to Andrei and seeing his sincerity, he agreed to help. He knew he couldn't remain silent. The three of them began working together, gathering documents and recordings that proved that Lopes had not only planted drugs in Andre's car, but was also part of a larger extortion and drug trafficking ring. With each new discovery, Andre felt the weight of injustice slowly lift. But he knew the real fight was yet to come. It was only the beginning, but he was more determined than ever. The time had finally come. After weeks of investigation, Andre, Patricia, and Carlos were ready to expose the whole truth. The evidence against Officer Lopes was irrefutable, and the journalist was able to secure a press conference that would attract the attention he needed. It was Andre's opportunity to not only clear his name, but also to fight for justice for all those who had been victims of similar abuse. The press conference was scheduled for late afternoon. The stage was set, television cameras, journalists, and a curious crowd that was beginning to gather. Andre felt a growing nervousness, but also renewed strength. The fight was not just about him. It was about all black people, all victims of abuses, committed in the name of order. He prepared to speak, but he knew that the real impact would come from the evidence he was about to present. When Lopes was called to testify, the atmosphere was tense. He seemed confident as always, perhaps believing that he could control the situation as he always did. But the truth had a power that could not be ignored. Patricia, with her experience, asked the first question, addressing Lopes's background and his connection to illegal activities. How do you explain the evidence found in your car and the recording of a former colleague's statement that you were involved in a drug trafficking plot within the police force? Patricia asked firmly. Lopes looked around, but his posture began to waver. The press conference he had hoped would be another victory for his team had now turned into his worst nightmare. "That's a lie! I never—" Lopes tried to justify himself, but the evidence didn't let him get away with it. Carlos's recording revealed in detail how Lopes planted drugs, extorted citizens, and manipulated the situation to incriminate Andre. It was at this moment that the true weight of the situation fell on Lopes. He found himself cornered and with no more lies to tell. Desperate, he looked at Andre, who was observing him with imperturbable calm. The police officer, now sweating and visibly nervous, made an unexpected move. "Please help me. I don't want to lose everything. You can help me, right?" Lopes begged with a trembling voice. That man who had previously treated him with such contempt was now at Andre's feet, asking for help. But Andre, without hesitation, answered firmly, "No, you won't get away with this. What you did to people, to my life, is unforgivable. I will not be an accomplice to this." Lopes' confession was key to dismantling the network of police corruption. The investigations progressed quickly, and others involved were identified. Within a few weeks, many of the corrupt officers were arrested, and a new wave of investigations began within the police force. For Andre, this was not revenge. Justice was finally being served. But he knew that although it was a great victory, his fight would not end there. Lopes' story would be just one of many yet to be told. The press conference became a milestone, not only for Andre, but for all those who fight against injustice. The public exposure of the network of police corruption made many people look at the security system with different eyes. The authorities could no longer ignore what was happening on the streets and in the police stations. Andre finally saw his name cleared, but the weight of the battle was still fresh in his mind. As the investigation into Lopes and other corrupt police officers progressed, Andre's life began to change. He became a public figure, a symbol of resistance and improvement. But fame also brought challenges. The attention he received was not always welcome. Many, especially those who were still allies of Lopes, began to see him as a threat. Fear that corruption would be eradicated led others to try to discredit Andre, spreading rumors and trying to weaken his position. But Andre was not alone. His mother was by his side, prouder than ever. Patricia continued to be a crucial ally, not only in her investigative journalism work, but also as a trusted friend. And Carlos, the former police officer, had become one of the most important sources of information about abuses within the force. Over time, Andre realized that his fight would not end with the arrest of a few police officers. The system was rotten, and the change he so desperately wanted had to go deeper. He began to get involved in community movements, helping young black people educate themselves about their rights and resist systemic oppression. I knew the road would be long, but now I was better prepared to face it. Andre's fight was just part of a larger movement. He now understood that although he had won an important battle, the real war against inequality was yet to come.